punks! Welcome back to the University of Radlands. We have another Cult of Chrome preview camp to look at today. Just a couple left, so they're winding down. And I will link Daniel's Board Game Geek post in the description below. Let's see what is on offer today. Today's camp is called Masquerade. It gives you 0 starting cards at the beginning of the game. It has a trait. Look at your punks anytime. If your punk is a person, you may pay its water cost to flip it. It enters play ready. And then it has the sidecar of 2 water to gain a punk. So as Daniel's mentioned in other previews, he kind of was adding these sidecars to camps to give them abilities that could be used maybe more often, and especially with camps that relied on some punk synergy, the camps being able to generate their own punks comes in handy. So let's break down this ability. Let's say we had a punk here, and then you had a punk there. At any point in time, you can peek and see what your punks are. And if they're a person, then you can pay their water cost. Now, during your turn, if it's a person, you can pay their water costs to flip them over. They enter play, and they're also ready to go. So, 1 water, flip over scientist. He's ready. You can spend another water and use his ability. We peeked at this one. It was a Magnus Carve. Spend 3 water to flip him over. He's ready to go. If you happen to have 2 more water, use his ability as well. And, we peeked at this one. Not a person, so we aren't able to flip it over. But, your opponent doesn't need to know that. You can just pretend that you're not needing to flip that person over, because you don't have to pay their water cost to flip them. You just have the ability to do that. So in the preview, Daniel kind of mentions that this camp is very similar and maybe even kind of an improvement on the original training camp, which what this one did was you weren't able to look at the punks, but you could spend 1 water, flip them over. If it happened to be a person, they entered play, but they were not ready. And if it was an event, you discarded the event, gained another punk, and a refund. This was just a more interesting camp and a little bit more fun than training camp, which is one of the reasons why this was kind of put on the chopping block as one of the 10 camps receiving a replacement ability. You didn't really need both. Masquerade seemed like a better ability or a better trait, and so that went away, and Masquerade is essentially kind of taking its place. Let's see what combos and synergies we can find with the camp. From the base game, as I mentioned, they enter play. So camps that rely on people entering play would benefit from Masquerade. So spend the water, flip the person over. If you were able to then play a second person, you then have Transplant Lab being a cheap way to do a restore, or Nest of Spies is a cheap way to do a damage. We are dealing with punks, so anything kind of in that punk package always comes in handy. Arcade would be pretty beneficial. This is a cheaper way to gain punks. As I mentioned, Masquerade does have the 2 water for a punk sidecar, but Arcade gives you punks for 1 water. And if you're going to be keeping punks around, Command Post always comes in handy having those punks. Command Post gets cheaper the more punks you have to deal damage. And then some other camps that have been previewed. Armory gives your punks the trait of being able to deal damage and also gives you punks. Fortress gives you 3 punks, so that's a lot of punks to be able to look at. The new cache is kind of a nicer way to gain punks and also send out the raiders. Motorcycle Club, another cheap way to gain punks as long as you can get 1 punk onto the board. Masquerade helps with that. Lobotomizer, being another way to gain punks if you're trying to restore your people and your operation fails and you gain a punk that way. And Black Market to an extent. As I mentioned, those characters enter play whenever you flip them, and Black Market is a camp that lets you use the junk effect of cards that entered play that turn. So the card that you flipped over, if it's a junk ability that you want to use as well, then pay for Black Market, use the junk ability, and if you still have enough water, because the person enters play ready, you can also use the ability on the person. Anytime you're dealing with punks, Uprising is always a really good card to have to gain more punks to be able to look at to see what you want to flip over. Rabble Rouser gives you cheap punks, and he gets cheap damage if you have some of those punks around. Vanguard, he gives you a punk friend that you're able to look at to see if you want to flip over. And the same for Argo Yeski, gives you a punk buddy, and all your punks gain his cheap damage. And of course, the other named characters in the game also can be junked for a punk if you're not wanting to pay their water cost. So this was a really fun camp, really fun camp to play test. One of my favorites from play testing and playing with Daniel. It used to be called X-Ray, because you could kind of flip over and see the camps. But then Daniel came up with the name Masquerade, because it's almost like, you can see the person, but your opponent can't. So it's like they're kind of wearing a mask and their identity is hidden. And then you can reveal who they are at any point in time, and they are ready to go. So just, as Daniel mentioned before in the previews, he wanted to explore traits a little bit more, explore punks a little bit more. And what better way to do that than to be able to look at your own punks and say, hey, I want this person to come out and they're going to be ready to go, and you can start using them right away. So awesome card. I'm glad it's one that Daniel decided to show off and preview. As I mentioned before, we are winding down, just one camp left after this one, so can't wait to see what that is going to be. But punks, what do you think? Is Masquerade one that you find interesting or that you like? Tell me about it. I want to talk to you about it. Leave a comment down below. What other combos and synergies do you see? Do you like the ability? Do you think it adds too much to the game? Is it adding too much to the design space? We'll have analysis paralysis looking at all these cards and all these punks. Let me know down below. And as always, stay thirsty, punks.